I'm John from Tinker Crafts and Travels, and today I'm going to be showing you how I ruined this cutting board. Well, I didn't ruin it, I can recarve it, but if you come in here closer, you can see there's a big chunk that has been knocked out. And the reason why this has happened is because the process I was using to make my cutting boards during Christmas, I didn't realize it at the time. It was not going deep enough into the female pocket, and it was leaving a big gap at the bottom, which was creating voids underneath it. So when I went to carve out this second cherry inlay, I could see underneath it how thin this maple material was getting. And so then when I added the cherry, I thought I could get away with it. I just filled more glue in there, but it dropped down and the material was so thin that it just popped right out. So part of my problem is I don't actually know what I did wrong. So I started off with numbers that I got from other YouTube videos where they started with a start depth of 0.20 and a max depth of 0.05. So I used those numbers to do mine. When I did it, it looked great when I was done. So I thought, hey, no problem. Now I want to do some more advanced stuff, and I'm going to do 2 layers, and that's when I discovered I did in fact have a problem. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to tweak the numbers, fiddle around. I've got some theories on what's going on here, and I'm going to create what's called an Inlay Story Board so that I can see what settings are going to work best for me and my machine and my bit. So let's get upstairs to the computer. But before we do that, I would like to do the standard like and subscribe. We're going to be doing a lot of different crafts videos. I'm doing stuff on the CNC. My wife does artwork and crafts, and some of my kids even do crafts too. So we're going to have lots of videos in the future on how to make things. Okay, let's go. Okay, so we're in Carveco, and I have made this based on the dimensions of some scrap end grain that I have. It's 4.5 by 11, and I have just gone along and I have put some, I think they were, let's see here, I think they're 1/2 inch, yeah, 1/2 inch wide rectangles with 3 inches tall. And I am just going to highlight all of them, and I'm going to do a V-Carve. I'm going to make my maximum depth 1/4 inch. I'm going to select my 15-degree V-bit, and I'm going to make sure the settings are right on there. Yes, that's what I want. And then I'm going to select my 1/8 of an inch end mill. Make sure the settings are right on there. Yep. And we got it. Materials already set to 3/4 inches. So that's it. Let me just write on here. Female. Inlay Storyboard. All right. So I'm going to save that. Let's just shorten it a little bit here. V-bit.
those two things saved. Now I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go back over to Carveco. I'm going to do new model 11. Hold on. I already had. Let's just do this. I've done this one. I've completely changed my plan since then. So let's see if I can just. It would be great if you could just delete all the toolpaths, but apparently I've got to go through one by one and do this. Because I've changed my mind on what I want to test out here based on what I've been seeing. All the, and I'm going to make one toolpath that's like that. Let's see here. Let's do this one. This one is the method that I've seen multiple people on YouTube doing with slight variations, but I'm going to do the one that has the start depth of 0.2 and a max depth of 0.05. I have no idea why they're getting these numbers and why you do a start depth of 2. One of the videos I watched said that they were going to reference the video they got these numbers from, but then they never did, or at least I couldn't figure out where they did, maybe. But nonetheless, I'm not exactly sure why they're doing these numbers, but what ended up happening was I noticed that everybody that was using these kind of numbers were using a ball nose bit instead of a true 15-degree V-bit. Now, the V-bit I use, I think, has the tip is flattened out at like 0.0001 of a millimeter. So it's almost completely a 15-degree bit, but not quite. So that might mean I need to change this number. But I don't know if they're using this number because they're using a ball nose bit as a V-bit. But when I use my bit to get these numbers, that's where I got this problem. But I'm going to do one carve with these numbers just so I have it on there on the storyboard to compare. So these are my original numbers that I did the cutting board at. So you did it this. I got the 15-degree, I got the 1/8 inch, and I actually did a step down of 0.125. And I don't think that's really going to change because of these numbers, but I'm still new to this, so it might be something that affected things, but and because, and I also did one, I start off at 0.1 and then I save that tool path and do it. So I'll have to do 2 tool paths on that. But the way I'm going to do it the other way is going to be more closer to the way I did the female. So I'm going to have to calculate that. Make sure I got everything right before I do. Material is still 1/4 inch or 3/4 inch. Everything's good there. So let's see. Let me just kind of original method path. All right, so then I will come here and save these paths, but I'm not going to save the V-bit path. I'm only going to save the, and I saw one of the videos I watched did this exact same method. It's basically, some people are ready to just plunge their 1/8 inch end mill in 0.2 inches, which is almost 1/4 inch, and go at 30 inches per minute. And it might work, but I feel like it's going to break my bit doing that much at once. So I do 0.1 first and then do 0.2. All right, so we got, there's going to be a lot of names to do this. So I may just end up speeding this video up. I don't know. We'll see. because it does seem like there's a lot of information on. Okay, so we will, no, not V-bit, in-mill. Why did it have that? All right, mail inlay. Yeah, I've got to come up with a better naming system because this is going to get confusing. Mail inlay. I'll know what it's talking about here. In-mill 0.051. Hopefully I can keep track of all this. All right. So then we will come back over here and we will change this back to 0.2. We will calculate again, and then I will save both of these toolpaths this time. So this is the in-mill 2. All right. And this is just, no. This is the V-bit. We don't need that 2 there because we only need 1 V-bit path for this test. All right. So that's that one. Now we're going to do this one. First, let me make sure, yeah, that's not highlighted. All right. Go back to toolpaths. We're going to create a new toolpath. And this one, I'm going to completely change everything. I'm going to do this exactly like the female side. It's just going to be a reverse of the female. So we're going to do a maximum depth of 0.25 because I couldn't figure out why we didn't do this in the first place. So I'm going to find out whether it's a good idea or a bad idea through trial and error. I'm just going to speed the rest of this part up because it turns out that all of these toolpaths were in fact a bad idea. But sometimes that's how we find things out. So I'm going to skip to the part where I find out. Change of plans. I am not going to glue these together at all because I have already been able to tell that this is not going to work. So, but the good news is I have never been so excited about a plan going bad. Try to put this thing in the tripod here. All right, so we got all these inlays, right? And these are my female pieces. They're all identical. I just did a straight V-carve at a flat depth of 1/4 inch, 0.25. So they're all identical. The bottoms of them, using this caliper, it would help if I had it the right way. Using this caliper, I can see that the bottom is 0.4425 wide, and that's identical on all of them. They're all the same. When we come up here to the tops of these, this one, remember, this one was the original settings, and it is it's 0.45 instead of 0.44. So it's just a little too wide to fit down in here. So when I changed the settings, I was operating under the impression that the video I watched, the guy took 0.2 as his start of cut, and he used 0.05 as his max depth to get 1/4 inch. And then he did an Inlay Story Board, and he said that the only number he was changing was the max depth cut number. So all of his storyboards were cut with a 0.2 start depth, and he changed the max depth. Well,
I took that to mean, because my problem was his results were the more he changed that number, the deeper it got into the carve, and he was mashing it down by the end because he did a full 1/4 inch. But so I thought, well, I have the opposite problem. This thing is, I want it to go deeper in the carve, but it's hitting the sides of the walls before it can. His was hitting the bottom of it. So mine was hitting the side. So I thought, well, then my problem is I need to change the other numbers. So I went to the extreme, thinking it was because of the ball nose bit and me using an actual 15-degree bit. So I went with, well, we'll just do a reverse, and so we went through that process, and it was the complete wrong direction to go. But it taught me something. And maybe this is obvious to some other people, but it wasn't obvious to me. The top of this is almost exactly, and if I could get it right there on the tip without coming down, yeah, it's almost exactly a 1/2 inch, which is what my vector was. And the top of these is also almost exactly 1/2 inch, because that's what my vector is. So this one is just as wide at the top as this one is at the top. And that's not what we want. What we want is for it to be just as wide at the top of this as it is narrow at the bottom. And the only way to do that is to lower your depth. And that's the reason why we do that. And what I am now thinking, now having seen all these results, is that I need to have a deeper start depth. So what's happening is you've got the bit, these two angles, and obviously this is just a rough sketch, but you've got it carving in this way on one side and carving in that way on the other side. So if you change, there's our male piece, right? If you start off with the top cut, then this is going to be the vector it follows. But if you change the start cut down here, it's going to narrow it, because it's going to start here, creating a different angle when it goes on both sides, narrowing this top piece. So the more you drop the start depth, so to me, it seems like to get in a perfect world where every CNC bit carved exactly, and maybe if you can manage to protect the point on one of these 15-degree bits that comes to an exact point, you could do it this way. But if you could do a 1/4 inch female cut and then do a start depth of a 1/4 inch on your male cut with a flat depth of 0, which is, I think, impossible to do in Carveco, but I am going to test that out too to see what happens. Because usually when you do 0, it just thinks then there's no flat depth. And I don't know what that would do. But basically, you need these two distances to be the same. And you need this to match that. So in order to do that, you have to start pretty much as close to a 1/4 inch as possible. Other people were starting at 20 and having 5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start closer to 25 and still stick with the same strategy of, if I take away from the start depth, I've got it, and have the number add up to 25. This hopefully will make a little more sense when I'm talking about it with the computer going. But basically, if you're only changing, say you had a 20 start depth and then you have a 0.5 flat depth, this angle is going to stay the same because that's 0.20. You're only adding down here. Well, if your female piece gets too wide there, none of this is really going to matter. It's just going to create a bigger gap above the board, the bigger you make that number, and the harder it's going to be to get in. This number is going to stay the same, and it's going to fit in this the same way. That's my theory based on what I'm seeing here. So I'm going to be changing, instead of doing a start depth of 20, I'm going to do maybe a start depth of 24 and a max cut of 0.1. or maybe even a start depth of 24.5 and a max depth of 0.05, so that I can get it as close to a reverse cut as possible. But I'm worried that if I make it too close, then I'll have the floor of it mashing into the cutting board or my piece. So I want there to be a tiny gap left over, just enough to fill with wood glue, but not so big that there are air pockets in there that the wood glue isn't filling. And the current settings I was using was giving me an air pocket underneath my inlay. And that is a big problem when you're making a cutting board that's going to be hit repeatedly with metal objects. So let's get up to the computer and get started.
All right, so we're back on the computer. We are going to go back to our Inlay storyboard, and I'm going to take all these tool paths that I created, and I wish I could just highlight them all, but I can't. So we're going to have to do one at a time, or if I can, I don't know how. I'm still new. I don't want to delete. I feel like it's like all or nothing. I don't want to delete all of them. That's the original method. I'm going to leave that one in case I ever need to do a storyboard again. I can take this file and go back to it. All right, so new toolpath here. Let's go V-Carve. We're going to do a stop depth on this one at, you know what, I'm going to first just see what happens. 0.25 maximum depth. I'm going to give it just a 0.0. Well, let's just see what happens when we do that. I'm just curious. These settings are what I want. But because I'm doing this, again, I like to do a 30-inch per minute feed rate. I'm going to have to save this as two different paths eventually. So I'll probably do one at 0.125 and then another one at 0.25. That way the end mill is only taking about 1.25 at a time, which is, to me, I've done that before, and I've had good success with those numbers, so I'm going to keep them there. When I did 0.15, just that extra 0.025 made a big difference, and the results were not good. So I'm going to keep it at doing a separate tool paths. Back on track here. 1/8 inch end mill for our roughing. Change this plunge rate. I need to go back there and permanently change this, but I like to do this one at 30. 1500 is kind of scary when it plunges that fast, especially with a tiny bit like that. All right, this is all the same. That's all the same. I'm going to name this one let's just call it male, because apparently you can't start your names with a decimal, because I found that out yesterday when I went to my machine and plugged the thumb drive in. It 0.25 start depth. The ones that started with a decimal wouldn't show up, so I had to go back and add male to all of them to get them to show up on my machine. Oops, what we're doing wrong. Okay, so see, it's saying the maximum depth of the tool has not been specified, but I have the checkbox for limit tool maximum depth. So if you do 0, you're going to get that. So I'm going to do 0.01. And all that's going to do is make it so that the gap above it is a little bit higher. But I still think it's going to be a problem on this one, because it's going to try to create an exact replica of the female, and I feel like I'm going to get a big gap on the side of that, just because, you know, the tools aren't perfect, but we'll see. So I'm going to do it anyways, just to find out. That's what we're doing today, testing everything. So that's just going to give me a 0.01 above it. Let's run the simulation here. See what it looks like. Make sure we're not crazy here. So yeah, see? It's going to look basically what I want. So that's the only way I can think of. I mean, I guess I could go even crazier and 0.001 or 0.0001, but I'm just going to, 0.01. That's less than a 1/16 of an inch, so it should be fine. It's just going to have a little bit of a gap on the plug on that one. So I'm not going to go through the whole process after I'm done recording. I'm going to go back, but know that I'm going to create 2 separate tool paths for my end mill. So there'll be 2 end mills for all of these files because they're all going to have a close to start depth of 0.25. And that's too much for my machine to handle, or it's too much for my eighth inch drill bit to handle at 30 inches a minute. There's probably a way to slow it down to like 10 inches or 5 inches a minute. I just don't want to do that. I feel more comfortable with these settings. So it's a little more time, but I feel like it's worth it to get the right result. So now I'm going to change this. First, we're going to go back to 2D. And I'm going to highlight this pocket, and I'm going to change this one. I'm going to do 0.24 and make this one 0.01. The other reason why I'm saying that I think this one's going to be a problem is if it's a perfect fit, then there's going to be no gap for the glue at the bottom. And that might, it might end up being a good thing. I don't think it's going to be a good thing. I think I need a little bit. So this is going to give me 0.1 of a gap at the bottom, basically, or ideally. We've got the same settings. I don't have to change any of that. I'm just going to change the name so it doesn't overwrite the other one. So I'm going to do this one at 0.24 start. And I'm going to know when I see these files, I'm going to try to keep this more consistent this time when I'm naming them to keep it straight in my head. These numbers are always going to add up to 25. With the exception of this one, I did add an extra 0.1, but I wanted that 25 exactly start depth. So the rest of them, I'm just going to be taking away from this number and adding to this one or vice versa, just to test it out. All right, so that's the 0.24 start. All right. Now we're going to do this one. And let's do 0.245. Okay. That is the right way to do that. I'm sitting here thinking of how to do math here now. Yeah. Right. So now we're going to do 24.5 and 0.05. So that's a really minor adjustment here. Hold on. All right, I realized I made a really big mistake on this 0.24 start when I started looking at these decimals. I need to make this one 0.01 and recalculate that. Now it's right. And if it still would have done the start depth of 0.24. It just would have made almost an 1/8 of an inch gap at the top of my plug because it wouldn't have been able to go in any deeper. So, but fixing that's going to make, I feel like, better results. So, on to the one we were working on earlier. We're going to change, I'm going to do this one at 245 and I'm going to make this one 0.05. So that's just a really minor adjustment. And so we're going to call this the 245 start and calculate that. Trusting that none of this has changed because it never does. So let's hope it's not one of those days. All right. And so now we're going to do 0.23 and I'm going to make this 0.02. So we're still getting 25, and the start depth is going to be 23. So that's going to give me a much bigger gap at the bottom, but not quite as big as this gap was. So we're going to just, I'm going to do all of these together, and what I was planning on doing is it will basically, hopefully, of these 5 things, I'm really just, of these 4, I'm going to figure out which one I like best. I already know I don't like this one because I've already seen the results of what happens when I use this one. But I'm really just doing this one again just for the reference. And I'm also not going to change, I'm not going to get a whole new piece to work on. I'm going to take the one that I screwed up just now that we were looking at down in the shop. Because these are all narrower, as long as I get the 0 relatively close, because they're so much more narrow than what I've got right now, they should just be removing material still, enough material to where I'm going to get these results again. So I shouldn't have to make a new piece, because you can always take away material on wood. You can't put it back on once it's off. All right. So we've got everything saved. I'm going to go get my thumb drive, and I'm going to save all these. And like I said, all of these paths I'm going to have to save once at a 0.125 for my end mill path, my roughing path, and then go back and save them at the closer to a 1/4 inch. That way my end mill is still only having to do a 0.125 depth per pass, which is 1/8 of an inch. It's 1/8 of an inch bit. Typically some people will say that you can get away with doing double the bit diameter, and you probably can on the bigger bits, but on a really skinny bit like 1/8 of an inch, I don't think you can double it. And from what I've seen, that's definitely true with the results I've already gotten. All right, so I'm going to save all these, and then we're going to do the carve, and we'll see the results. All right, so we've got our second carve. And here, let me put this underneath it. I was not able to reuse this part. I still think it would have worked, but by the time I came back down here, you can see this thing started bowing on me. I swear it wasn't like that this morning, but I don't know if opening the garage door for a shipment I had messed it up, but yeah. So I had to use a different piece of wood. And so here you can see it lined up with the settings that I used. This is the original one. I had to recarve it as well, even though I know it's not going to work already. It is 0.4, almost 0.45 at the top. This one is the one that went all the way down. All of these carved at 25, except for this one. This one actually carved at 26, so I could do the start depth of 25. So no matter what I do, I'm gonna, the thing that worries me the most about this one that I think is gonna fail on it is that it's gonna fit in there perfect, almost too perfect, and this part is gonna hit the floor of the female piece, and that is gonna give me a wider gap or a wider seam on my inlay than I really want. So I really feel like all of these, I know this one already fits from, it fits, but it leaves a gap underneath. All of these are gonna fit in the inlays. They're just gonna get stopped. They're gonna start hitting the walls of the inlay at a different point. See, that one's 4.4. This one is, look at that, almost 4.32. This one, 4.47. And of course, this is just me holding a caliper. It's not exactly the most steady method of doing this, but when we put them together, we'll know the real truth. And then we got, again, trying to use this part of the caliper. You got to read it upside down from this camera angle, but it's 4.43. So
This one is definitely going to go all the way down, and it's going to hit the floor of that. So, and you can see right here too that it's like this, as we moved over, this is the widest, this is the narrowest. And this is going to be a little bit wider, a little bit wider. I don't know. I think this one's actually wider than this one because it's 245. And then this one. So yeah. But we're going to put them together. I still got to figure out how to safely cut these apart. I still am not sure that this is the most efficient way to make a test because I'm running in. It's taking a long time to do these pockets for one. And for another, I'm a little bit nervous about cutting these last two apart when I get down and I'm only holding this. That's not exactly safe. So I'll figure something out. I've got a sled or something. And there's always clamps. So we'll see. Okay. So I've got them all separate. I was able to safely separate them on the table saw sled using some clamping methods that kept everything nice and secure, where I both didn't have to worry about losing a finger or having stuff fly into my eyeballs. All right. So I wrote that out. It's also, I didn't say this before I ended the video, it's a good idea to label these before you cut them out, just because it makes it easier to remember which one goes where. And that's a really important factor in this. So now we're just going to glue these in the old typical way. Hold on one moment. Okay, so in order to clamp this up, it's going to involve a crazy spider-legged formation of clamps. That's going to be really difficult to do on camera. But I can tell already, just from dry fitting, this is the original. And when I was putting weight on this, it wasn't going that much further in there. And I was getting this gap, which I thought, well, that makes sense because that means that all my seams are going to be real crisp. But I wasn't really factoring in that was also going to leave a huge gap underneath the thing, creating an air bubble in my piece. Now this one has a gap, but it's 2501. So this is the only one that went to 0.26. And I feel like what's happening when I'm pushing it in is the top of this is hitting the floor, basically, of this other one. And because I did it at 26, so I could get the 25 start, that's why I have this little gap. And then this is the one I think is going to be my winner. But I'm not, I'm not really going to know until I peel it all off. But it feels like it's got the best combination. These go in, but I feel like the more I go in, the more I start building that gap again. I don't know. So we'll see when we get all this cleared off and can actually run it through the table saw and look at the profile and see what kind of gaps I got. And we'll see the tops of it where I can see what kind of seams I got, because I want the optimum gap at the bottom where there's no air pocket and the tightness around the edges for that perfect seam. Okay, so this is what it looks like after the glue up. I could have done a better job with this glue up. Wasn't really as concerned about it since it was just a test file. And you can see that gap there. It's kind of crooked. I'm worried about this one. I clamped it so much that it ended up cracking the end grain, and I'm pretty sure that's because this one is hitting the floor in there. This one went pretty good, and I think that's probably going to be the best one, but we'll see what the gaps look like in the seam. This one had a little tiny gap. It's like as far as you go, the gap kept getting bigger, and this seemed like the best of both worlds, but we won't really know until I remove all this material. I didn't want to separate these and clamp them all individually, so I didn't really have a jig or anything set up to do a better job of clamping it, so I'm worried that I might have messed the whole thing up with them being crooked like that, but we'll see. But I still feel like
either way. This was going to have a big gap, and it was going to hit the floor, and it's probably going to have a really bad seam on it. This one I think is going to be great. That one might be okay. This one, these three might be okay, but we'll just see. All right, this is it. I've run it through the new belt sander I just got, and it's actually pretty surprising that all of the gaps look pretty good. You can see this is the original, and I don't know what was going on with my 15-degree bit when I cut this female section, because it kind of put these weird corners. I know it's really hard to see because it's a maple inlay inside maple, but it does, to my eye, I can see the line a lot better. And plus, I didn't want to mill more walnut or cherry just for a inlay test. So I can see it. I think it shows up okay on the camera. But like I said, it's just, you know, it looks like there's a dark spot here, but that's not glue. That's just something kind of weird with the stand. Maybe it's just I could run it through the sander again one more time, but that's not the seam. I wouldn't do that. I'd probably just run it. That's something like that. But they all look good from this point of view. But I know just from experience that this one probably is going to have a gap underneath it. I don't know how bad it's going to be under these, but I know from experience that this one is going to have a gap. So let's run it through the table saw and find out. All right, so there we go. Sorry for those of you that wanted to see a shot of me working a table saw, but I'm trying to keep this just mainly about numbers and not about working machines. All right, so there was the original settings I was using, and you can see here it's got the biggest pocket underneath it of all of them because the sides started hitting a lot earlier. It may not look like a big deal, but when you're trying to do something as big as that, you know, I ended up not, you know, with voids basically underneath there. And it's like, yeah, I could probably just pour a ton of glue in there, but I just don't feel like that's a good thing for longevity of a cutting board. This is 2501, and it's got the smallest gap because it basically was pushing the floor there. I still feel like my favorite is either 2401. It's probably what I'm going to go with when I go back to working on this cutting board. I feel like this one was pretty good too, but there's a difference of only 0.05. 23 and 2, it had a pretty big gap as well. And I feel like for me and my machine and this bit I'm using, I think 2401 are the settings I want to go with. And definitely nothing any more than this. I mean, the gap should have been, and it kind of is smaller, but I think even it with the 0.005 was hitting the floor just like that one. So I think I'm going to go with 2401, and that's the end of this one. All these numbers explained, and I mean, these are only probably going to work for the bit I'm using right now. If I was to change to a pure 15-degree tip that comes to an actual point instead of just a 0.001 flat tipped to it, I would probably have to do another one of these. And if I was going to use a ball nose bit, I would have to do another one of these things just to find out what settings works best with each bit. Because like I said, this was working good for the people that were using ball nose bits. You know, I saw the guy do a story just like it, and these settings on his storyboard looked like this. So that's all I got for you guys today. Like and subscribe, comment if you got any questions. If anybody else finds any links that they want to share
about these numbers, feel free to share that in the comments, and you guys have a great day.